Zelda 2. It's finally time to talk about this game. I've heard so much about it, but I'd hardly given it a proper try until today. To be honest, I was scared. I'd heard this was the hardest game of the series, the one with the most archaic design, and I ran in fear of Zelda 2. But today, I'd conquer my fear for you. I would be willing to review it for you. It's a noble sacrifice, I know, but let's get started. I discovered that NSO also had an upgraded version of Zelda 2, subtitled Link, Warrior Without Equal, where the player's attack, magic, and life are already maxed out. I'm not sure I had the confidence to beat the game as a vanilla challenge, so I was thankful for the boost. I decided there was no time like the present, so I started the game, and left the palace where the sleeping Zelda rested, stuck under her spell and waiting for only me to reverse the dreaded curse. But it would be a long while until that was possible, and when I started the game, I had no idea. But I traveled northeast, found a cave, and before long, my path took me to Parappa Palace, the first dungeon of the game. I was terrified. This game had always stumped me. So much was left unsaid. I always felt lost. How would I fare now that I was giving it another chance, even with the challenge reduced via NSO? It was too late to question things. I navigated the dungeon and descended into its depths. It started out pretty straightforward. I nabbed the first key and moved forward, but then I found another locked door and had trouble finding its key. It turns out my intuition was to take the elevators down, assuming the dungeon was about descent. But I found the key by taking the elevator upwards, so I could move on. I found the boss, wailed on it, and without much celebration, beat the dungeon. I lit a beacon or something. I don't know what the story is about, but I beat the dungeon, I think. So I explored and found some tough caves surrounding me. I felt like I was approaching areas I wasn't ready for, since the nearby caves were full of these tough, invisible enemies. So I googled some things to make sure I had the required items to be able to progress. And I found out I had totally missed getting the candle in Dungeon 1. So I backtracked, went back into the dungeon, got the candle, and left the dungeon. So now, the invisible enemies and caves were finally made visible, and it wasn't hard for me to defeat them and move forward. I did have trouble figuring out how to use the jump spell, but that's on me. The controls for it just didn't make sense. Why would you have to press select after leaving the menu? But whatever, moving on. I found Bagu in the woods, thanks to a guide, and then headed south to Saria's town. I found a mirror under a table, thanks to a guide, and left the town. I know I wouldn't have been able to figure out how to cross the bridge on my own, but that's over now. So now, ahead of us is Death Mountain. I've heard legends of this place, and here it is. To be honest, I took a couple of weeks off of this game before attempting this section. I wanted to give it my undivided attention, not just the late-night attentiveness of a man who's already out of energy. I wanted to come back when I was focused, alert, and that was an issue, that just often when I have free time to play games, it is late at night when I'm tired, when I'm off of work, and that's the time that I have. And I do want to engage with these games. I want to pay attention. I want to be alert. But anyway, that's another problem. The way Death Mountain works is that it's a maze of cave entrances that spits you out in seemingly random places. But there is a layout you can learn, and I was dedicated to doing at least this section without a guide. I wanted to find my way through the Death Mountain maze on my own, and with a little trial and error, and the use of Rewind in the NSO app to minimize my mistakes, I made it through. Or so I thought. I found a cave at the end of the maze that led me through another network of caves that eventually led me to the hammer. Now, what on earth will I use this for? I explored a little bit, crossed a bridge, and then finally came upon the town of Mido. There were a couple of hints here. Someone recommended I return to Rudo, and someone else said that the island palace had a raft, and that sounded important to me, but who knows? I wasn't really sure where the way forward was, to be honest. So I left the town, traveled west, and found a swamp. It was annoying that my walking speed was suddenly affected by the swamp, but whatever. I found it, the next dungeon, or palace in this game, right? So I explored the palace, found a couple of keys, found a couple locked doors, but I won't lie, I started getting lost, and it was kind of frustrating. I had no map, no waypoint, and not to sound like a sissy, but even Zelda 1 had maps and compasses. This felt like a step back. To be frank, weeks went by. Every now and then I'd boot up the game and explore this palace, but ran into walls each time. And it wasn't that the layout was really that confusing, it's just that the game wasn't fun. Dungeons didn't feel like interesting puzzles, they were empty hallways with randomized enemies. Backtracking didn't feel interesting. I didn't feel rewarded with an understanding of a complex dungeon layout. I felt punished for ending up at the end of a long hallway, only to realize I needed to be on the other side of the palace. traversing isn't interesting through it. You're just walking through the hallways again and again and again. Eventually, I looked up a guide, realized where one of the keys I hadn't found was, nabbed it, found the dungeon item, found the dungeon boss, and quickly beat it. I sighed with relief. But it made me ask, am I even going to beat the game? Do I even want to? If I'm relieved to be done with a dungeon because I'm not enjoying it, right, I have some questions to ask. I love Zelda, and I thought that I could find it within myself to enjoy even the worst the series has to offer, but it's not just that Zelda 2 isn't like the other entries, or that its difficulty is a barrier. It just isn't fun. It isn't intellectually engaging. Zelda 1 was a fun puzzle where you got to explore the world, explore dungeons, and take on groups of enemies in interesting configurations, but Zelda 2, I think it feels hastily slapped together. It's a combination of elements from other games and other genres, and there's no intrigue, no puzzle, just long hallways full of enemies, both in the palaces and the overworld. That's what this game is about, long hallways. And I mean, it's a side-scroller, that's how it works, but still it doesn't really take advantage of the potential that I think a side-scroller could offer the Zelda series, and I think this is only proved that when Link's Awakening attempted a couple of side-scrolling sections, it worked. I mean, obviously, like, it's handled a little bit differently, and that, I mean, to be frank, that's a separate video. But I think I'm headed towards a conclusion. I can't believe I was already losing steam after only the second palace. This is either going to be a long game, or I think I was making peace with the fact that I gave it a solid try. But maybe this is where I let you decide, because you know what? I don't want to play this game anymore. So this is the plan. For the purpose of this video, I'm stopping the game here. I feel like I've played enough to give it a fair review, at least partially. But I also know that in the grand scheme of things, I didn't make it very far at all. It's kind of embarrassing, actually. So if you feel that you'd rather me 100% the game to be able to fully criticize it fairly, comment down below. Otherwise, I still feel comfortable reviewing it with only a partial playthrough. You can tell me if you don't think that's fair, but I still have a lot of thoughts about Zelda 2, and I think they're still worth saying. So let's go point by point and unpack what makes this game tick. So if you don't remember, I use a 5-star system as I go through all my criteria. 0 stars is abysmal. 1 star is extremely lacking. 2 stars is fairly lacking. 3 stars is average or serviceable. 4 stars is above average. And 5 stars is masterful. Let's start by unpacking the core gameplay. The controls are functional but limited. Movement, jumping, and attacks are pretty standard for side-scrollers of the time, but the spell menu is a bit silly. Using the start button to cast a spell is definitely not intuitive, and that lack of intuition is going to move us down to 2 stars. Items. Items are, oh man, they're barely functional, serving as glorified keys for arbitrary roadblocks. I didn't encounter anything that substantially improved gameplay. 1 star. And I know that this is also affected by, like, I didn't play that much of the game. So I don't know, maybe there's some later items in the game that just, like, maybe they're really cool, and I have no idea. But either way, I didn't experience them. For the sake of my review, 1 star. Menus. Menus are relatively simple and unobtrusive, but the lack of any kind of guidance or description for spells can actually be confusing. I'm going to give it 3 stars. Now for combat. You have a couple of options for combat. Your standard slash will suffice, or a crouch stab, or a jumping stab, or a spell. So the variety of options is nice and can lead to actually some satisfying interactions with enemies that feels more like a duel than a mash of buttons. The mechanics aren't really the issue, and I'm willing to give credit where credit's due. 4 stars for combat mechanics. Now for enemy AI. And the issue with combat is the enemy AI, and it's a mixed bag. See, the standard enemy form is fine and makes sense, and I have no issues fighting enemies like the stall foes in the game. But when projectiles, I feel like I put the emphasis on the wrong, or like the stress on the wrong syllable. When projectiles, I did it again. But when projectiles come into play, yeah, there you go. That's Joe. Yeah, I'm a voiceover king. See, there could be a range of issues. Fellas, we're keeping in the outtakes. But when projectiles come into play, there can be a range of issues. Some projectiles are almost impossible to block or dodge, with some enemies acting as projectiles themselves, hurling themselves towards the player at a high speed. There's a particular enemy that I'm thinking of that reminds me of a DVD player or screensaver. It's not fun to fight. I don't think you even can fight it. You just have to predict its movements so you can barely dodge it. And there are several rooms where they just come at you in swarms. This is just one example, but there are several other enemy designs that use this kind of philosophy. They throw a lot at you, and it's not hard because you have to figure anything out. It's not even really a challenge of combat skill. You just have to have enough health to either take the hits or be an absolute god at dodging attacks. The game creates difficulty through creating a barrage of enemies, and that's not particularly interesting. At their best, enemies are fine, but at their worst, I think it's a recipe for mayhem, and not in a fun way. And maybe I'm just complaining because I'm bad at the game, but personally, I think it's a design flaw. And I'm not against games with swarms of enemies. I love the swarms of enemies, how they were handled in Zelda 1, and I love the Arkham games. And I think you can throw a lot at the player and it work, but it has to come with good design. And I think later Zelda games would figure that out. And I know I've heard developer interviews where they look at like Chambara and even like stunt choreography from fighting movies, right, as an inspiration for the enemy AI in Ocarina of Time, right, where enemies will wait their turn to attack you, etc., right? But anyway, that's a separate video. The point is, enemy AI for Zelda 2 is getting 1 star. Level design. Oh, now let's discuss the game's level design, starting with the overworld. Man, where do I begin with the overworld? On one hand, I do appreciate the additions of towns into Hyrule. That as a concept is an improvement from the first game, to be sure. You can learn that there are places where you can heal your life and replenish your magic, and in towns, you can also find hints from NPCs that offer direction, or there might even be important items or upgrades hidden in towns. Those are all good things. The issue with hints, though, is that they hardly make any sense. I also appreciate that the overworld in general guides you towards certain locations. You feel like you're taking a journey along a constructed path designed by game designers with awareness of progression. However, that path is often obfuscated and it's easy to feel lost, and not in a fun way. Because I often do enjoy in Zelda games being able to get lost and explore and find my way on my own. But in this game, when there's hardly any meaningful hints, when you can go the wrong way and find invisible enemies that you have no chance of fighting, when the roadblocks feel insurmountable with no direction as to how to move forward, personally, I don't love it. 2 stars. Now for overworld aesthetics. So, I'm going to be frank, in my opinion, aesthetically, the overworld sucks. And not just because it's held back by the conventions of the time, but I think it's ugly. I think some of the pixel art could have been better designed. And for the first time, the choice of color isn't awful, but in general, I do think it's ugly. That said, I do appreciate the world design as a whole from a world building perspective, right? How the world map takes you across a continent, through mountains, forests, caves, swamps. And the pixel art during battle screens actually does handle the world design better. So it's a mixed bag, but I'm willing to average it at 3 stars. That's fine. It's average. So let's talk about dungeon design now. It's tough to judge the dungeons too, since I didn't get very far into the game. I acknowledge that, so if you have an issue with my score, feel free to take that with a grain of salt. But I was definitely frustrated by the designs of the dungeons, and this might be the biggest hurdle for me that stopped me from having fun. I think I explained during my gameplay segment enough, but just to say it here, I struggled to have fun with these dungeons. I couldn't justify the layouts, the enemies, the key placements. It just wasn't fun. Bosses weren't engaging, items weren't interesting. It was just the same old, on repeat until the end. Endless hallways full of randomized enemies. That's it. And that's not fun. And I guess like that's the big thing, right? Is this game, I think there's a lot of it that like I could have been patient with and worked through. Because like, I guess that's the thing, right? It's like, I put this game down. I couldn't get through it. But I don't think that would have been the case considering so many strengths that the game has. Thinking about, I think like the overworld design and like being able to explore the map and move forward, like I think that stuff is fine. I think the combat is also mostly fine. There's a couple enemies I would take out, right? But it's the dungeon design. And like, I want to be clear that like, what stopped me from moving forward in this game was the dungeons. And not that they were hard, but that they weren't fun, right? That's the issue. That's what made me put the game down, is that I played these dungeons and wasn't having fun. So I wanted to just make that clear. So my final score for dungeon design in Zelda 2 is 1 star. 1 star. It's the beginnings of something, right? I can't give it 0 stars, right? And it's like, it's not awful. It's just there's a lot to be desired. But now let's talk about dungeon aesthetics. And you know, my main beef with dungeons aesthetically, it's it's not just an overall sameness to the feels. Zelda 1 also had that issue, but it's worse here with how it impacts the sense of space as a whole. See, dungeons are full of long, empty hallways, as I've discussed, and it's not like how in Zelda 1, you'll go into a room and understand immediately that there might be a staircase in the corner or a key you have to reach. Just like in Zelda 2, there's less communication through the design of the space. And I know that that's inherent to the side-scrolling nature of it, but it just leads to a lot of confusion. The dungeons aren't necessarily ugly, but there's a lot holding them back. So, 2 stars. Side quests. Oh man. So I didn't encounter much that I could in good faith describe as a side quest. So I don't want to deduct points if the game omits an element. I don't think that's fair, deduction for omission. However, I think the truth is that the game had some semblances of side quests, but they're just oddly handled depending on your definition of side quest, I suppose. But there are secrets hidden throughout the world, and some NPCs may leave hints towards them. But I got the feeling that the game didn't have much besides its bones, so to speak, right, from a design standpoint. I think most of everything that I encountered actually seemed to point towards the direction of the main quest. I think it's pretty efficient, with extra life contained at some of the ends of cave passages, perchance, but there's not really much more that you'll find. So, 1 star for side quests. Story. Okay, here we go. Now to unpack the story elements of Zelda 2. So to be clear, I am judging the game from its execution of its story elements from within the game. And I judged Zelda 1 the same way. Anything contained in the manual or any additional materials won't factor in into my review. And I know Zelda 2 does have a substantial backstory in its manual. And I won't dock points for the game not providing the narrative context, because I understand that the manual provides that context instead. I have other issues that have nothing to do with the manual, I think. I guess actually, let me be clear. I didn't use the manual in my playthrough, and it did lead to some confusion. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't sure how to find the first palace. I was confused about my objective at the beginning of the game. And those are both questions that would have been answered by the manual. So I do have mixed feelings on how I think this issue could have been fixed, and I don't mind additional story notes being included in the manual, but I think the game on its own should have enough information to communicate your objective. So, anyway, with all that out of the way, let's talk about game structure. So, this discussion leads us to a critique of the game, the game structure. The game loop is fairly simple, and if you squint, it seems like most other Zelda games. You explore the world, find a new town, and find a dungeon nearby that might give you an item. You beat the boss, and repeat until you save the world. The issue is that the order of dungeons feels a bit arbitrary, and when you're spit back out into the world after completing a dungeon, there's no guidance about where to go next. You just keep moving forward and see where the godforsaken game takes you next. And usually there's some kind of friction, and I guess I don't mind not being told where to go next. The first Zelda game didn't tell me where to go next, but exploring the overworld, I wasn't running into roadblocks. But for Zelda 2, maybe you'll run into Death Mountain, a network of caves with a ton of enemies you can't avoid. Maybe you'll run into a swamp, a biome full of water that all but halts your walking speed. It doesn't feel like an obstacle, it feels like a roadblock. And because obstacles aren't bad in game design. That's the thing. Solving problems is what games are all about. But when obstacles turn into roadblocks, when they halt the momentum and energy of the player, that sucks. That's not fun. And I want to be fair because I find it hard to articulate the difference, but I know it when I see it. So for a general lack of objective and a main quest that slows the player down at every turn that I've experienced so far, I have to give the game structure a 2. It has a solid foundation for better games to come in the future, but on its own, its execution is weak. Writing. So it's hard to discuss the writing of these retro entries since there's just not much to criticize, which probably artificially inflates the scores of this particular piece of criteria. Like I said, I don't like taking points off just for lack of inclusion. I want to take points off for bad implementation. And this is easier because I can compare the story implementation in Zelda 2 to how it was handled in Zelda 1, which also included a manual to enhance its narrative. The difference is that Zelda 1 also had a well-written prologue in-game which used a text scroll to communicate the story and gameplay objectives to its player, but Zelda 2's prologue it's even more vague and in my opinion doesn't give the player enough of a push towards the in-game goals. And maybe that has more to do with just my opinion of the implementation, but I can understand, in simple terms, assemble the Triforce pieces to match Ganon's power, A lot better than place the crystals in arbitrary palaces in order to unlock the pathway to the Triforce so you can reverse a sleeping spell. And what it comes down to is just that I think the story doesn't defend the gameplay. This is also an issue with later entries of the Zelda series too, and I'll get to those then. Like how in Skyward Sword, oh man, like the opening makes you want to rescue Zelda. The opening is so powerful, but the dungeons you complete in Skyward Sword aren't directly linked to you getting any closer to saving Zelda. So there's this disconnect between what you want to do, but the actual dungeons in the game. And I don't want arbitrary missions only half defended by the story. I want the story to motivate the gameplay, and for the gameplay to tell stories in return. And I think Zelda at its best does that. And Zelda 2 is another example where I feel a disconnect. And it's a disconnect I didn't feel in Zelda 1. The dialogue writing of Zelda 2 is also weak, full of what I hope are mistranslations and vague hints that don't really communicate anything of substance. So overall, this game's writing is weak, no matter how you frame it. 1 star. Now there's not really much to call a cinematic. There's blinking lights at the ends of dungeons, but character animations are even more limited in my opinion than they were in Zelda 1. The prologue could be considered a cinematic, and the title screen is fine, I suppose, but its use of tile work for the background also kind of makes the pixel art in the intro look like mush, in my opinion. That's a later problem, but I'll go ahead and voice that here. I'll get more into the art style in a second, but for now, I'll give cinematics 1 star. Visuals. All right, now let's get into the visuals specifically. The art style. It's hit or miss, but in general, I don't mind it. I think Link and some of the other characters are kind of cute. They feel small, and the manual art also helps cement that. But the world design and its aesthetics, they're not anything special, but it's not bad. 3 stars overall for art style. Now for the sprite work. It's a mixed bag, but for characters, I think it's actually quite good. Enemies too. It's nice that faces are clear and readable, and especially Link's. I think that's actually an advantage of the side-scrolling format. But for the map assets, some of the sprites aren't very clear, and I've seen other games in similar styles with better sprites for some of the overworld features, for example. So overall, 3 stars. Now the tile work. The tile work is also a mixed bag. In general, I think it holds back the aesthetics. I think it could have just taken a couple of tweaks to the pixel art in order to get some of the repetition to look just a tad more organic, especially for forests and mountains. Bricks look fine, for instance, but the interiors of rooms and villages look off. And I appreciate the illusion of perspective in those indoor rooms. I just think it could have been handled better, even for the time. Overall, 2 stars. Yeah, there are plenty of screens with fine tile work, but there's a lot of jank too. So, HUD. Alright, now, hot take, I think the HUD and UI is actually fine. Text is easy to read. Health and magic meters are clear. It's simple, effective, and stays out of the way. 5 stars. What do you know? I got some good things to say about the game. What do you know? Isn't that crazy? Now let's talk about the music. I'm about to have a lot more good to say about the game as well. We're getting into a good ending for the video, right? Composition. So are the themes as iconic as the themes from Zelda 1? Not quite, but I think that they would be if the game itself was more well received. There's some beautiful music with a new overworld theme that's definitely reminiscent of the original Zelda music, with plenty of great tracks for the battle music and town. The town theme is fine too. But the real special new track is the dungeon theme. Oh man, while I have a fondness for the original Zelda 1 dungeon music, this new theme is beautiful, and has more famously been reinterpreted for the Smash Bros. Series as the background music for Hyrule Temple. There's mystery and darkness, and a sense of danger and excitement. You really feel like you're exploring the depths of an ancient forgotten temple full of monsters. Not every track in the game is perfect, but it's a strong set of themes overall. 4 stars. Now, for the production of the music, I also have no notes really. It's using the tech available at the time and using it well. 5 stars. Now, the sound effects, they're solid overall. I don't think they pack quite the same punch as the selection of sounds from Zelda 1. Overall, I'll reduce it to 3 stars. Fairly average for the most part. Now, for my final score. All right, y'all ready? Let's count up everything. And out of 100 total possible points, my score for Zelda 2 is, drumroll please, 48. Wow, not great, huh? Comparing it to Zelda 1, oh man. It's definitely interesting that overall it shares some of the same strengths, some of the same pitfalls, but overall is much worse overall. Comparing my scores, it is interesting that I gave Zelda 2 an extra star for dungeon aesthetics over Zelda 1. I don't know whether that's fair or not comparing them now, but just something interesting to note about the way I scored them. But yeah, overall, I feel like I can defend these scores. And I'm very excited to get some of the later games in the series, now that I know I'll be able to look at them much more favorably. Oh man, this was a tough video to make, and I am honestly a little embarrassed that I couldn't even beat the game. But I did want to go ahead and talk about it, and comment down below if you want me to give Zelda 2 another chance. I might return to it and see if I can beat it one day, but I don't have it in me today. I wasn't having fun, and just, I still think I had a lot to say, and I think I had some thoughts that I think are fair, even for what I played. Obviously, it's not the whole game, and feel free to comment down below if there's something that you think my mind would be changed about if I played more. But right now, I don't think it's worth it. And really, the thought that I have that made me put the game down was just, if the rest of the dungeons are like this, whether they're harder or not, that doesn't matter. But if they're like this, if it's just endless hallways, keys that just missing keys all the time, if it's just going to be more of that, I'm not going to be interested in playing this game, right? If it's more of that. Because Zelda dungeons, even Zelda dungeons about finding keys, they can be well designed, and it's okay to get lost and to take time and to be a little bit frustrated. I think of the water temple in Ocarina of Time. I love the water temple from Ocarina of Time, right? But anyway, this is enough for this video, and just comment down below your thoughts on Zelda 2. I'm very excited to move forward with these reviews in the future. So without further ado, I'll let you go.
Now, if you're looking for other ways to support me, as always, you can support me as a creator by becoming a member on Patreon. There you'll get access to all kinds of exclusive behind-the-scenes content like in-progress outlines, scripts, storyboards, rough cuts, and even soundtracks for my newest films. By becoming a member, you'll also be thanked in the credits for any film I finish during your membership. You can also support me by streaming my music. I compose all of the scores for my own short films, and you can listen to those soundtracks on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you listen to music. Just look up Joe Kendrick. That's JoeKendrick. Y'all have a wonderful day, and without further ado, I'll let you go.